At this point I'm ready to make a bunch of measures, which I might not end up using, but I think I'll use them. So I'm going to make them. My first measure is to grab today's date, because I will be using that to filter basically all of my measures, all of my tables and graphs, except for the one in the middle, because I need to know what today's date is to know what 90 days ago was and what the current month is. So today's date, and I'm choosing to not add a space because I think that will make it easier when I reference the measures. I don't think you need the quotation mark, the apostrophe, but in any case that is simply grabbing today. Actually it is straight up just called today, and then again you can't visualize a measure without making a graph, so I'll be doing that. And I don't want to have the date time format, not that it's really important, but it's just annoying to me. So that is fine. And then I want to grab the year from today's date, and I'm making this measure based on today's date, so that later on when I do testing, I only have to change one variable, which conveniently there is a function called year of today's date. So that is fine, which should then be a number. Yep. And then I can grab the first day of the year and the last day of the year. And I don't think I use them, but I think it would make sense. Actually, I think I have to test it later on, but we'll get there when we get there. So again, today's year and 01 and 01. So that would be the 1st of January of the current year. Then the 12th and 31. And these are also in date time, which I think is ugly. Before I get started, because there are some other measures that only make sense when I start to make the graphs. So I want to grab today's date, but 3 months ago, and I could do 90 days and then keep the bottom graphs that show in the last 90 days. It's actually going to be in the last 3 months. So I'm going to say take the current date and then remove 3 days or 3 months from it. And there is conveniently also a function to do exactly that, which is called eDate. So it just returns the date that is indicated number of months before or after. So it takes the 29th and then adds or removes to it, which is nice because maybe you have 29 days, but then when you're going back in time to February, you don't have 29 days. And this function takes that into account. Today's date, and I want to say +3, and then I can put that in here and say that should be a date. Yeah, so in this case, because there are 29 days in October, so at that point I also want 3 months later. No, this is 3 months later. I need 3 months prior. 3 months prior, which is the exact same function, but I add a minus here because it can also go back and back in time. So very convenient function. I have today's date, and then I have some that relate to birthdays, but I'll get to them when I get to the functions. I think that will make more sense. So the first, I'm just going to keep that here in the bottom. We can make the graph in the middle because that's the simplest graph, which simply takes the dates. If I can find that, I take the date in the X. I don't want quarter because that's so ugly. And I want the dates, the birthdays, but I want that to be a measure, to not have implicit measures. Count of birthdays, which is simply to count the rows that are in my birthday table. So in this case, when I don't have any filter context, that should be 19, which it is. And then when I add filter context, yeah, then it will give me the proper value. And I can go further down because that's what I want. And then as you see here, I don't want the graph to be like this, where it only shows me the values where I have a number. I want that to be, if I can find that. And I was struggling a little why I can't find the option here to decide whether this should be continuous or categorical. And that is because, and this is something I have done multiple times, I forgot to go into my calendar table and say that it's actually a calendar table. And that's why the icon here in date, it shows that it's a date, but it's not the correct one, the correct icon. So I need to say that this should be a date table. My date column is called date, and then it will change that icon to this little character card thing, and now it will behave the way I want it to. So I am not perfect in DAX. And what I wanted was this continuous and not categorical, because this only shows me dates where I have values, and I don't want that. I want it to start. And here is the problem I mentioned, where right now the graph will start on the 23rd of January, because that's my first value, and it will end on the 3rd of December, which I don't want. I'm also going to fix the y-axis, which is why I wanted to include this imposter date point. So I want my minimum, but I don't want that to be a fixed date, where I could go in here and say it should be January 1st, but then it's 2023, which I don't want. I want that to be a function, or rather a measure, and I already made this here, first date of year. So I can go in and say my minimum should be a measure. And this, I think, is a bit confusing, like where am I supposed to press anything? What am I supposed to do? What field? Well, it's not a field, it's a measure, but when I go in and then I click here, I can see all of my measures, which is exactly what I need. So first day of year is January, and if we just go back, oh yeah, that's because I added that. So if we just delete that, so this is the native version. And then when I change this to be first day of year, we'll see that there is a gap now on the left, and likewise when I do that for the maximum, I can also generate a gap on the right side. And that's exactly what I wanted. So now I need to make a measure that will create a here in variable in values under the y-axis. I want my minimum to be 0 always, and my maximum should be equal to the maximum count of birthdays on the same day plus 1. So I will never have a situation like this where I have one data bar touching the top of the y-axis, which I think is ugly. It leads me to think that maybe there's data that's being hidden, like why is it touching the top? I don't like that. You can choose whether you want to do this extra step, but I'm going to. Yeah, so what I need to do is, and this is actually, I'll split this into another video because this is a separate thing I want to show. So I will be back in a moment. Yep.